Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak to your spirit, not your circumstance. The title set before us, What God Revealed About Charlie Kirk Will Strengthen Your Faith, is not merely about a man or a moment. It is about how God uses individuals to ignite conviction, courage, and clarity in the hearts of those who listen. There are times when God raises a voice not to echo what everyone is saying, but to awaken what everyone has forgotten. And when God reveals something about a person's purpose, it is rarely for that one person alone. It is a signal to the faithful that He is still moving, still speaking, still leading. Charlie Kirk stands as an example of someone God has positioned with purpose, not because of perfection, but because of obedience. God is not searching for the most polished. He is searching for the most available. And when He reveals His hand on a life, He is calling us to recognize His hand on ours as well. Let me tell you this, the same God who guides voices in culture, faith, and conviction is the God who sees you right now. He sees your doubts, your confusion, your fears, but He also sees your potential. What He reveals through others is often a reflection of what He wants to awaken inside you. When God highlights a life like Charlie Kirk's, He is reminding us that faith is not silent, destiny is not accidental, and influence is not random. God aligns people in specific seasons to challenge complacency and inspire courage. And that should strengthen your faith, because if God can lift someone from obscurity to impact, He can lift you from struggle to victory. Ladies and gentlemen, hear this clearly. God reveals to revive. He exposes to equip. He appoints to awaken. So the real message is not about platforms, it's about purpose. The same Spirit that raises voices in public is the Spirit that can raise hope in your heart. You may not have a microphone, but you have a mission. You may not stand on a stage, but you stand in a story God is writing. Let this revelation fuel your faith. If God is active in the lives of leaders today, then He is assuredly active in yours. If He is still calling people to speak truth in difficult times, then He is still calling you to live boldly in uncertain days. If He can use one person to shape conversations across a nation, He can use you to shift the atmosphere in your home, your workplace, your community. Do not underestimate the power of divine assignment. What God reveals about one person is often a mirror for the call inside you. This is not the hour for silent faith. This is not the moment for hesitant belief. This is the season of courage, conviction, and clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, let your faith rise. If God is still choosing, still guiding, still revealing, then He has not forgotten you. Let this strengthen your spirit. You are not a spectator in God's plan. You are a participant. And the same God who anoints voices in the spotlight is anointing hearts in the quiet. Stand tall, believe deeply, walk boldly. What God reveals in others is a prophecy of what He can do through you. When God reveals something about a person, an event, or a situation, that revelation is never isolated or accidental. It carries a purpose beyond the individual involved, because God communicates in layers, and what He exposes in one life is often meant to ignite something in many others. The idea that God reveals to inspire and strengthen is rooted in the way He moves throughout history. Every revelation is a message, a signal, a reminder, and sometimes even a warning. When people witness God's hand on someone else's journey, it stirs faith because it proves that God is not distant, silent, or inactive. Instead, it reminds us that He is present, engaged, and intentional with the unfolding narrative of human lives. Seeing someone rise from obscurity into influence through God's guidance is not about admiring their prominence, but recognizing the power of the one who guided them there. The human heart often wrestles with doubt, insecurity, and the fear that God may not be paying attention to personal struggles. When God elevates a person or reveals their assignment, it works as visual confirmation that He has not forgotten His people. For a believer who watches from the sidelines, thinking their prayers are unnoticed or their efforts unseen. Witnessing a divine revelation in someone else's life becomes a living testimony. It breaks the lie that faith is futile. It assures them that God still speaks, still leads, and still fulfills His promises. Many individuals operate with a silent question lodged in their minds. Does God still move in the way He once did? They hear stories of prophets, kings, and ordinary people raised up in ancient times, but in the modern world, the noise of culture and chaos often makes it hard to see divine activity. Yet, when God brings someone into the spotlight with purpose, not for their fame, but for His message, it resets the atmosphere of faith. The revelation becomes a spiritual spark, igniting courage in those who are hesitant and awakening belief in those who are weary. There is also a deeper dimension to this. God does not reveal someone's role or influence to create spectators. He does it to create participants. Inspiration is the first step, but strengthening the faith of others is the ultimate outcome. When people see God orchestrating circumstances for someone else, it gives them the courage to trust Him in their own uncertainties. Doubt begins to lose its grip when evidence of God's involvement becomes visible in the lives of others. This principle is seen all throughout Scripture. When God raised Moses, it was not just for Moses. The people of Israel needed to see that God was still listening to their cries. When David was anointed as king, that revelation was not only about leadership. It told a discouraged nation that God was still choosing, still guiding, and still in control. When Esther was positioned in the palace, the revelation of her role became the hope of her people. These moments didn't just impact the individuals, they fortified the faith of entire generations. In the same way, modern examples exist not to elevate personalities, but to remind people that purpose has not expired. God is still calling people into influence, positioning them to speak truth, defend conviction, or challenge darkness with courage. When God reveals something significant about a person like Charlie Kirk, the focus is not meant to be on admiration. It is meant to push hearts toward recognition of God's ongoing involvement in human affairs. The revelation is less about the individual and more about what God is trying to say through the individual. Inspiration is powerful, but faith strengthening goes beyond admiration. It demands reflection. If God is working through one life, it forces a question: what is He trying to awaken in mine? If God can guide someone through adversity, opposition, and uncertainty into clarity and influence, what might He be trying to do with me? This realization begins to shift the mindset from comparison to confirmation. Rather than thinking that divine favor is limited to a chosen few, believers start to understand that God uses visible examples to awaken the invisible potential in others. The human spirit responds to evidence. Faith may be the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, but God, in His mercy, often gives visible reference points to strengthen the unseen. He did it with Gideon when he reduced the army to 300, yet still gave them victory. He did it with Elijah when fire fell from heaven before the prophets of Baal. And He continues to do it in modern settings with people who stand firm in their beliefs. When their lives bear the mark of divine assignment, it serves as proof that God is not limited by culture, criticism, or chaos. God knows that discouragement can quietly drain faith. People may continue praying, attending, or believing outwardly, but internally, their trust can become fragile. So when He reveals His hand on someone's life, it acts as a surge of confirmation. It illustrates His sovereignty. It reassures that He is not intimidated by the times. It shows that He is still moving people into place for reasons beyond traditional expectations. Another dimension of God revealing someone's purpose is the way it confronts the lie that influence belongs only to the powerful, the wealthy, or the widely connected. God often chooses those the world would not expect, And when he highlights their role, it dismantles the fear that ordinary people have no place in extraordinary outcomes. The observer begins to understand that divine calling is not limited by background resources or the opinions of others. This realization can reignite faith in those who once believed but later grew weary. The revelation becomes a call to re-engage, to lift the head, to believe again that God writes better stories than any human imagination could conceive. The strengthening of faith does not come by theory alone. It comes through demonstration. Words can encourage, but revelation activates. When someone witnesses God shaping another person's journey, aligning circumstances that human effort could not coordinate, it becomes more than inspiration. It becomes a challenge to doubt. It whispers to the hesitant heart that if God is still doing it there, He can surely do it here. The same Spirit that empowers some is available to all who believe. Another powerful effect of divine revelation is that it removes the illusion of randomness. People often think that successful outcomes are produced only by human strategy, privilege, or coincidence. But when God reveals His involvement, it disrupts that mindset. It shows that events can be orchestrated by a higher hand. That recognition renews faith in those who feel overlooked, reminding them that God has not lost track of their lives. He does not reveal another person's purpose to dismiss yours. He reveals it to awaken yours. Sometimes individuals are strengthened by revelation because it helps them reposition their focus. Instead of obsessing over obstacles, they begin to look for opportunities. Instead of feeling abandoned, they sense alignment. Seeing God move in others pulls the lens back from self-centered uncertainty and widens the view to include divine activity. This broader vision anchors faith in something bigger than circumstance. It creates room for trust to grow, because evidence of God's movement in one place becomes expectation for His movement in another. In moments of cultural confusion, public hostility, or spiritual fatigue, God often reveals the purpose of specific individuals to deliver a message to those who are silently asking if light can still break through the noise. The revelation becomes a declaration that God is not retreating. He is still deploying people to speak truth with conviction, stand firm in turbulence, and model boldness. That sight, that example, that undeniable evidence can be the very thing that lifts someone's spirit out of resignation. It is one thing to read about faith and quite another to witness its fruit in real time. People may not always articulate it, but when they see God working, their faith is strengthened by proximity to the miraculous. Even if the miracle is simply someone's courage, someone's influence, someone's endurance, it becomes a sign that God is not silent. And if He is not silent, then He is not absent. If He is not absent, then He is not finished. The strengthening of faith through revelation also works across generations. Young people who might feel lost in a world of shifting values need proof that God still calls and still equips. Older believers who fear the decline of morality need reminders that God still raises voices to confront deception. Individuals in personal battles need confirmation that their prayers are not in vain. The life God chooses to reveal becomes a living sermon without words, preaching hope, resilience, and divine intentionality to any who pay attention. In revealing His hand on someone else, God is not highlighting their achievement, but His faithfulness. Faith does not grow by applauding people. It grows by recognizing God's fingerprints on their journey. That recognition brings alignment. It stirs desire. It reminds every heart that the author of purpose is still writing, still guiding, still speaking in ways that transcend headlines and headlines of despair. People often underestimate how closely others are watching for signs that God is still at work. A single revelation can influence dozens, hundreds, or thousands, not because of admiration for the individual, but because of renewed confidence in the God behind the assignment. That is why divine revelation carries such profound weight. It reaches into weary spaces, lifts tired minds, and infuses hearts with courage to keep believing, keep praying, and keep walking even when the path is not fully visible. God has never required perfection to fulfill His purposes. He has always looked for those who are willing to say yes despite their flaws, fears, and past mistakes. The belief that only perfect, polished, or highly qualified people can be used by God is one of the greatest lies that keeps many from stepping into their destiny. When we consider the way God moves throughout time, we see a consistent pattern. He does not call the flawless. He perfects the called. His power is not displayed through human strength, but through human surrender. What makes someone usable by God is not their resume, but their response. Availability is the currency of divine purpose, and obedience is the door through which God works. The reason this truth strengthens faith is because every person knows their own weaknesses, and if they believe those weaknesses disqualify them, they will never rise to their calling. But when they witness God using someone imperfect yet devoted, someone ordinary yet surrendered, it breaks the fear that they are not enough. It shows that the requirement for purpose is not flawlessness, but faithfulness. God has always chosen the humble, the unexpected, and the overlooked to demonstrate that His strength is made perfect in weakness. Moses was slow of speech and hesitant, yet God used him to confront kings. Gideon was insecure and afraid, yet God used him to lead an army. David was a shepherd boy, not a soldier, yet he became a king. Peter was impulsive and inconsistent, yet he became a pillar of the early church. These examples make it clear that the deciding factor is not human perfection, but divine appointment. The world measures worth by talent, appearance, status, and credentials, but God measures by heart, willingness, and obedience. When someone like Charlie Kirk rises to influence and purpose, it is not because he is perfect, but because he is available. That visibility becomes a mirror to others, reflecting the possibility that God can work through them just as powerfully. It cancels the fear-based belief that only those with flawless character or elite backgrounds can carry impact. God delights in using the unexpected to reveal His sovereignty. When He does, He sends a message that should strengthen the faith of every hesitant believer. If I can use them, I can use you. People often disqualify themselves before God ever does. They look at their past, their failures, their lack of credentials, and assume God cannot or will not choose them. But God sees availability as a blank canvas. He is not limited by human shortcomings. He is glorified by overcoming them. Those who think they must clean themselves up before God can call them misunderstand the nature of grace. Grace is not a reward for the perfect. It is the empowerment of the willing. When people witness God elevating someone who did not fit the mold, it challenges the idea that only the polished can carry influence. It proves that divine purpose is assigned, not achieved. It is received by surrender, not earned by superiority. That realization takes the pressure off striving and redirects focus toward obedience. The burden to be perfect is replaced by the call to be available. And that transition strengthens faith because it puts destiny within reach of anyone willing to respond. Availability is powerful because it gives God room to work. A person may feel unqualified, but God qualifies those He calls. When He places a message in someone's heart, He equips them for the mission. When He reveals their assignment, it is not because they are complete, but because He plans to complete the work through them. People who wait for perfection will never begin. Those who move in obedience give God the opportunity to be glorified. The flaw of perfectionism paralyzes many who compare themselves to others and conclude they are not ready, not worthy, not strong enough, not wise enough. But when they see someone being used by God who is clearly not relying on perfection but on faith, it shakes that mindset. It becomes a testimony that God honors availability more than ability. The person God uses may be ridiculed, underestimated, or criticized, but their impact speaks louder than opinions. And the impact itself strengthens the belief of others who wrestle with doubt about their own usefulness. They begin to realize that God is not searching for those who meet human standards, but for those who are willing to carry divine assignment despite human imperfection. The enemy of faith often whispers accusations about inadequacy. He convinces people that their past sins, current struggles, or lack of influence makes them unusable. But God writes stories that defy human logic. He transforms liabilities into platforms. He lifts voices from unlikely places and uses them to shape culture, confront deception, and inspire courage. When people witness that happening, it becomes a living message. Do not count yourself out. Availability means surrendering the idea that everything must be perfect before stepping forward. It means trusting God to do what you cannot. It means believing that your willingness matters more than your weakness. This perspective strengthens faith because it shifts dependence from self to God. Those who think they must be flawless rely on their own strength. Those who understand availability rely on God's power. And where reliance on God exists, boldness and faith begin to grow. It is not about ignoring personal growth or dismissing the importance of character. Rather, it is about recognizing that God shapes character in the process of obedience. He refines those who respond to His call. He does not require them to be complete before beginning. He molds them while they walk with Him. Faith grows in action, not in isolation. Many people of influence today were once unknown, unsure, or unprepared. Their journey proves that destiny unfolds through steps of obedience, not leaps of perfection. Each time God uses such a person, the message to the watching world is clear. Step forward as you are and let God be the one who prepares you along the way. Availability also confronts the idea that only voices with platforms matter. God uses voices in homes, workplaces, small communities, churches, and unseen spaces. Influence is not measured by applause, but by obedience. When someone available to God begins to make impact, others start to believe that their small voice might matter too. That belief strengthens their resolve to act, speak, serve, or lead wherever God places them. Another important aspect of availability is the courage to stand in assignment even when critics emerge. The more visible someone becomes, the more scrutiny they face. If they tried to rely on their own perfection, they would collapse under pressure. But those who rely on God's strength understand that human opinion does not authorize or negate divine calling. Their perseverance becomes another layer of testimony that encourages others to stand firm even when misunderstood. Faith is not strengthened by distant theory, but by relatable evidence. When people see someone who is visibly human, imperfect, flawed, learning, growing, yet still being used powerfully by God, it dismantles the belief that divine purpose is reserved for a spiritual elite. It reassures those who feel average or inadequate that God is near to them too. The realization that God moves through availability rather than perfection changes everything. It means the door to impact is open, not locked. It means the invitation to purpose is extended, not withheld. It means the pressure to perform is replaced by the call to trust. When that truth settles in someone's heart, their faith rises. They no longer see themselves as disqualified, but as potential vessels. They no longer see their flaws as fatal, but as areas where God's strength can be displayed. The courage to believe becomes stronger because the requirement becomes attainable. God does not ask for what you do not have. He asks for what you are willing to give. Availability is simply the willingness to say yes. It is the posture of readiness, the heart that says, "Here I am, use me." When that posture is revealed in someone else's life and seen bearing fruit, it inspires people to adopt the same attitude. Faith is strengthened when people realize that God has not created a hierarchy of worthiness. He has opened the path for all who will follow. The greatest barrier to stepping into calling is often the belief that one is not ready, but readiness is rarely about external completion. It is about internal surrender. Once a person understands that God values availability over perfection, they stop waiting for the perfect moment and start trusting His timing. Their actions shift from hesitation to obedience, and obedience always positions a person to experience God's power. When testimonies emerge from such obedience, they become fuel for the faith of those who hear them. The knowledge that God is willing to use those who simply make themselves available restores hope to those who have been paralyzed by self-doubt. It awakens courage in those who assumed their flaws were final. It gives new energy to those who thought they had missed their chance. It reminds everyone that God's criteria are different from the world's. The world says, be flawless before you speak, stand, or lead. God says, be willing, and I will do the rest. That truth, once seen, heard, or understood through the life of another, becomes a spiritual catalyst. It removes the barriers that insecurity built. It changes prayer from use someone else to use me too, Lord. And in that shift, faith is renewed, strengthened, and activated. When God reveals something through the life of another person, that revelation is not merely an observation to admire from a distance. It is often a signal about what He desires to stir within those who witness it. The call of God does not echo in isolation. It reverberates through examples, testimonies, and movements that awaken hidden potential in others. Many people move through life uncertain of their assignment, unsure of their significance, and unaware that heaven has already written their name into a larger plan. They doubt their voice, underestimate their influence, and assume their struggles disqualify them. Yet when they see someone being used by God in a way that challenges culture, elevates truth, or defends righteousness, something in their spirit begins to respond. They may not fully understand it, but the example becomes a mirror showing them what God may be trying to activate in their own lives. When God positions somebody with purpose and allows their assignment to be seen publicly, it becomes more than just inspiration. It becomes prophetic in nature. It speaks to the heart and says, the same God who is working through them is ready to work through you if you are willing. People often think that certain individuals are chosen because of special gifts or unique circumstances, but the deeper truth is that purpose is never random. God does not raise voices just so they can stand alone. He raises them so others will recognize the season and respond to their own calling. What happens in one life becomes a catalyst for awakening in many. It creates an internal stirring that challenges apathy, confronts fear, and pushes those who have been silent or passive to reconsider their place in the story. There are people right now who have prayers locked in their throats, ideas buried under insecurity, and convictions drowned out by doubt. They see corruption in culture, suffering in society, and confusion in the world, but they feel unprepared to do anything significant. Then they watch someone step into their assignment, not in arrogance, but in obedience, and something shifts. They begin to understand that their voice matters too. They see that influence is not exclusively tied to fame or resources, but to calling and courage. This realization is often the first step toward awakening their own purpose. Suddenly, the idea of stepping out no longer feels impossible, it feels necessary. When God reveals His hand on another person, it is not an announcement of superiority, but an invitation to those who are watching. It invites them to examine their fears and question their excuses. It invites them to believe that if God is still calling people to speak truth, protect values, and carry light into darkness, then He has not overlooked them. The awakening that happens inside a person is subtle at first. It may begin as a spark, a thought that says, maybe I am meant to do more. That spark is not accidental. It is God using someone else's obedience to knock on the door of another person's destiny. And if that spark is nurtured, it becomes conviction, and conviction leads to action. People often live beneath their calling because they think God only uses those with visible platforms. But platforms do not create purpose. Purpose creates platforms. Someone might speak to millions while another speaks to one, yet both can shape eternity if they move in obedience. Witnessing another person follow their assignment shows that God distributes responsibility across many lives, not a select few. It reminds people that there is no such thing as a spectator in the kingdom of God. Everyone is born with a mission, but missions remain hidden when fear is louder than faith. A visible example quiets that fear by proving that God equips the willing, not just the qualified. There is also an important psychological and spiritual shift that happens when believers begin to recognize calling through another person's life. They stop asking, why them? And start asking, what about me? Not in jealousy, but in awakening. They begin to see that they have something to contribute. They start identifying the burdens, passions, and convictions that have been lingering in their hearts for years. Those burdens are often signals of calling. But calling stays dormant until something or someone awakens it. Revelation through others often becomes that catalyst. Sometimes people do not understand they are called because their environment has never affirmed it. They may have grown up around doubt, discouragement, or apathy. They may have never heard anyone tell them they matter to the plans of God. But when someone steps into purpose boldly and unapologetically, it exposes the lie that calling is rare. It shows that destiny is not an exclusive privilege, but a divine invitation extended to every believer, and that realization can change everything about how a person sees themselves. They no longer feel like observers of God's work. They begin to believe they are part of it. When a person sees another standing for truth, challenging deception, or leading with conviction, it can awaken gifts they forgot they had. They may remember moments when they felt stirred to speak up, but stayed silent. They may recall dreams they abandoned because life became complicated. They may suddenly feel that returning to their purpose is not too late. This internal awakening is how revival begins, not always through mass gatherings, but through individual hearts coming alive one by one. A single obedient life can become a signal flare in the Spirit, calling others to stand up, rise up, and move into alignment with God's plan. Awakening also happens when someone sees the cost of obedience and realizes they can endure their own. Many people fear stepping into purpose because they worry about criticism, rejection, or resistance. Yet when they see someone else navigating opposition with strength, they realize that fear does not disappear before obedience. It often disappears because of obedience. The boldness of one becomes the encouragement of many. It dismantles the myth that calling is comfortable and replaces it with the truth that calling is powerful. Another layer of awakening comes from understanding timing. God often reveals someone's assignment not just to show what is possible, but to signal that the season requires action. In times of cultural chaos, moral decline, or spiritual confusion, God does not raise examples merely for applause. He raises them to awaken soldiers who have been asleep in their armor. When a person sees someone advancing in purpose during troubling time, they recognize that waiting for the world to settle before stepping into destiny is a deception. Purpose is often activated in the midst of pressure, not the absence of it. There are people whose calling is buried beneath the weight of low self-worth. They believe they have nothing to offer. But then they see someone who was counted out, underestimated, or dismissed rise into influence because God breathed on their obedience. This kind of testimony awakens hope. It whispers to the soul that calling is not limited by background, education, or status. It whispers that the same God who lifted one can lift another. And once that hope takes root, it becomes difficult to stay silent, passive, or hidden. When God reveals His movement through another individual, it is also a test of perception. Some will criticize, mock, or dismiss what they see. Others will discern the deeper message. Those who listen spiritually will sense that God is not just showing what He is doing in someone else, He is calling them to examine what He wants to do in them. They will begin to pray differently, think differently, plan differently. They will no longer ask for comfort, they will ask for courage. They will no longer pray to be overlooked, they will pray to be positioned. The awakening of personal purpose is one of the most powerful outcomes of seeing God use another person. It transforms identity. It shifts mindset. It replaces fear with responsibility. It reminds individuals that their existence is intentional. Every time God reveals an assignment through someone, He is reminding others that they too were born for impact. They may not share the same role, but they share the same calling to be a vessel. The methods differ, but the mandate is the same. Advance the kingdom, carry the message, influence the world around them for good. A person might not know where to begin, but awakening does not require clarity all at once. It begins with willingness. It continues with prayer. It grows through action. Watching someone answer their calling often teaches others that they do not need the whole map before they start walking. They just need to take the first obedient step. Calling becomes clear through movement, not through waiting. Seeing somebody else live that truth gives permission to those who have been stuck in hesitation. In every generation, God raises visible examples, not to create spectators, but to awaken participants. Revelation is rarely about applause, it is about activation. The life He highlights becomes a message that calls dormant gifts to life. It shakes the dust off dreams that have been shelved. It disrupts comfort and stirs conviction. And once a heart is awakened to purpose, faith begins to grow in new ways. They start to pray with expectation, walk with confidence, and speak with authority. The question shifts from "Can God use me?" to "How will God use me?" That shift is the birth of purpose, and purpose awakened is faith strengthened. Faith does not grow in silence or survive in secrecy. It gains strength when it is tested, spoken, and lived with conviction. The time we are in does not allow for a passive kind of belief. The world is loud with confusion, darkness, and compromise. And if believers choose silence, hesitation, or fear, then every God-given assignment becomes delayed, diluted, or dismissed. The fourth point speaks to the truth that this is not the season for quiet faith or timid Christianity. It's a time that demands courage, conviction, and clarity from those who believe. God is still guiding His people, still appointing voices, and still awakening boldness in hearts that may have once been quiet. What He is doing in others is a call for every witness to step forward with renewed strength. There are countless individuals who believe in God but hesitate to live out their faith boldly because they fear conflict, judgment, or misunderstanding. They hold their convictions privately while watching culture speak loudly against everything they stand for. The danger of silent faith is that it allows deception to multiply without resistance. Remaining silent might feel safe, but it is a surrender disguised as caution. True faith is not merely internal. It must be expressed through words, choices, and courage. The cowardice that hides behind the idea of staying neutral or avoiding trouble is not protection, it is paralysis. When God reveals people who speak boldly, lead courageously, or stand openly, it is not to showcase personal strength, but to awaken courage in others. There is a misconception that boldness is a personality trait, when in reality it is a spiritual posture. Some of the boldest people God has used throughout time were not naturally confident or extroverted. They were simply convicted. Conviction is fuel for courage. When a person is deeply anchored in truth, they cannot remain silent when lies take the stage. Their clarity of belief becomes stronger than their fear of reaction. Observing such a person reminds others that silence is not humility, it is often avoidance. God does not ask for aggression or arrogance, but He calls for courage. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means acting despite fear, because the cause is greater than the consequence. The world has always tried to shame faith into silence. People of conviction are often labeled as extreme, outdated, or intolerant simply because they refuse to bend to cultural pressure. But every time someone stands firm, they break the illusion that everyone agrees with deception. They become a reminder that truth still has a voice, and that those who belong to God do not have to apologize for alignment with His Word. Seeing someone stand without flinching strengthens those who have been internally agreeing with truth, but externally shrinking back. It reminds them that conviction unspoken eventually becomes conviction unused, and unused conviction becomes faith without impact. Clarity is another dimension of this point. There are people who love God but are unsure where they stand on important issues. They avoid speaking up because they feel they don't know enough or fear saying the wrong thing. But clarity does not develop in stillness, it develops in engagement. When believers see others articulate truth with wisdom, it gives them a pattern to follow. It proves that courage does not always roar. It can speak calmly, stand steadily, and act purposefully. Courage is not always public speech or grand gestures. Sometimes it is quiet consistency, choosing righteousness when compromise is easier, defending principles even when it costs relationships, or refusing to conform when conformity is the norm. This generation does not suffer from a lack of knowledge as much as it suffers from a lack of boldness. People know what is right, but often do not act on it, hoping someone else will take the lead. But truth without action leads to a slow erosion of conviction. Every time God raises someone who is unafraid to say what others only think privately, it sends a ripple into the hearts of quiet believers. It challenges them to stop waiting for someone else to carry the responsibility they also share. When they witness courage, they are reminded of the cost of inaction. Cultural battles are not lost because evil is strong, but because the righteous are silent. Even in personal matters, courage is necessary. Some people need boldness not for public influence, but for private obedience. There are decisions God is urging them to make, habits He is calling them to break, relationships He is leading them to leave, or assignments He is beckoning them to begin. Yet hesitation keeps them stuck in delay. When they observe someone stepping out in trust despite uncertainty, they realize the only thing stopping them is fear. And fear loses authority the moment someone chooses obedience over comfort. That is how personal transformation begins, through courageous steps that reshape entire lives. God is still speaking and still appointing people to carry His messages, but He does not do it only to elevate individuals. He does it to signal a call to the many who have been unsure, afraid, or weary. When they see truth defended boldly, faith lived publicly, and values held without apology, they are reminded that they were never meant to blend in. There is nothing humble about hiding light in the name of politeness. Light fulfills its purpose only when it shines. Salt preserves only when it makes contact. Faith influences only when it is visible. The strengthening of faith through courage, conviction, and clarity also has a multiplying effect. One person's boldness can ignite hundreds. One declaration can silence a lie. One act of obedience can inspire another. God often uses visible courage as a recruitment strategy for hidden warriors. He shines a light on one life to awaken 10 more. Those 10 can awaken 100. And what begins as an individual act becomes a movement. People sometimes pray for revival without realizing that revival begins the moment dormant courage is awakened inside someone who has stayed quiet too long. Clarity is not just about knowing what to say. It is about knowing who you are and who you belong to. When that identity becomes secure, the fear of rejection loses power. People of conviction understand that agreement with God is more important than approval from people. They are not reckless, but they refuse to be intimidated. Their clarity cuts through the fog of cultural confusion. When others see that clarity, they begin to untangle their own beliefs from the fear of disapproval. They start to remember that truth is not determined by popular vote, but by eternal standards. Courage also exposes the illusion that timing must be perfect before action can begin. Those waiting for ideal conditions will wait forever because opposition does not disappear before obedience. It often appears because of obedience. Yet God has always moved most powerfully through people who refuse to wait for permission from culture. The bold choices of one become a model for others who needed to know it was possible to withstand pressure and remain steadfast. Even those who feel small or unnoticed can be emboldened by observing courage in others. They realize that influence is not limited to public figures. A parent raising children with righteous values is walking in courage. A student refusing to compromise identity is demonstrating conviction. An employee who will not participate in unethical behavior is living with clarity. A pastor unafraid to preach truth is walking in obedience. A neighbor who shares their faith gently but boldly is living out assignment. When such actions are seen, they resonate. They remind others that ordinary obedience produces extraordinary impact. Faith that remains hidden eventually weakens. Faith that stands, speaks, and lives outwardly becomes stronger. It gains depth with every risk taken in alignment with God's truth. When God reveals examples of courage in the world, they act as anchors for those drifting in fear. They remind believers that the times do not determine their boldness, the Spirit within them does. Faith is not meant to be a belief held in private, but a force that reshapes the world around it. This is why clarity is essential. Without clarity, people hesitate. Without conviction, they compromise. Without courage, they remain silent. And without expression, faith does not grow. The world is not changed by hidden belief, but by visible obedience. When believers witness others standing unapologetically aligned with God's purposes, it confronts the temptation to retreat. It draws out courage that was buried beneath politeness or timidity. It reignites the conviction that now is not the time to shrink back, but to step forward. Those who think their actions do not matter often forget that every calling is part of a larger design. God does not reveal courage in isolation. He does it to rally the hesitant, to wake the weary, and to remind the faithful that they are not alone. The presence of others living boldly silences the lie that standing for truth is a losing battle. It proves that conviction carried with grace still has power, and that clarity spoken with resolve can still shift atmospheres. God is not finished using voices in this generation. He is not done awakening hearts that have gone quiet. He is not silent, and neither should those who belong to Him be. Courage, conviction, and clarity are not extras in the life of faith. They are the backbone of it. Believers who walk in these qualities become living proof that God is still appointing people for such a time as this. And every witness to that truth finds their own faith stirred, strengthened, and summoned into action.